We just got a ton of new information and gameplay around the Outer Worlds, the up-and-coming game from Obsidian Entertainment. During this year's Pax East, they did hold their own panel, and during that, they answered questions, talked about the game in general, but also showed us a ton of gameplay. One of the really interesting and cool parts about this was it wasn't like a pre-recorded gameplay trailer or highly edited together, it was actually somebody there playing it in real time. From this, we get a couple of things. They give somewhat of a response to the Outer Worlds being an Epic Game Store exclusive. We can almost infer a release date based on the state you see the game in, as well as they're actually playing the game, they open up some of the menus, so we get a more behind the scenes look, definitely more details than we've gotten from a lot of the other trailers. In this video, I'm going to be going over all of that. If you enjoyed the video, you can leave a like or subscribe, but without further ado, just some of the overarching statements they made during this. We find out that they actually began work on the Outer Worlds on April 11th in 2016, and that is when they started pre-production, but it does give us a pretty good idea as to the development time of this. Even further, as we're seeing the gameplay of this one, they make it quite clear this is one of the alpha builds of this game, so things aren't necessarily final. Even further, this build is actually just from this past Thursday, so it is a very present look at the state of the Outer Worlds, and there are some things missing from this. You could certainly notice some frame issues or stability issues. Visually, I imagine the game is going to look pretty much exactly the same as you see in the background, but also one fairly major feature that isn't currently implemented is dialogue audio. So as people are talking in this game, you didn't hear anything. So now, of course, all of these features will be implemented by release, and overall the game looked pretty good, but considering it is a very recent alpha build and there still are fairly fundamental features not yet implemented, I'm going to speculate that a summer release is probably a little bit less likely. It could be maybe at the end of summer, but I know some people are holding out hope for like a July release date, which, hey, maybe that's a potential thing, but I certainly don't think that's going to be the case after seeing this gameplay. They also do mention how 20% of the people who worked on this game also worked on Fallout New Vegas. This is pretty interesting because when you look at the gameplay, when you actually look at some of the combat or dialogue, it really looks like Fallout New Vegas. Like if somebody showed me this under the guise that it was some really advanced mod for Fallout New Vegas, I wouldn't be shocked. It is using a totally separate game engine, but just the flow of the two games and the feel of them are very similar. Towards the end of this, they actually give their own Q&A, and right before they start the Q&A, they make an overall statement about the Epic Game Store. If you aren't familiar, just 1 week ago, we found out that the Outer Worlds would be exclusive for 1 year to the Epic Game Store and to the Microsoft Store, meaning it won't be out on Steam until 2020. A lot of people were really upset about this. In this, they actually confirmed that that decision was made by Private Division, the publisher of this game. There's actually some rumors that Obsidian only found this news out a few hours before it went public to everyone.
There's probably one question that maybe if you've messaged me on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or text me or DM'd me, any kind of thing lately about the Epic Game Store. We do want to let you know that our Private Division partners have been fantastic to work with. We love working with them. That was a decision that they made for the game, and we're just excited to be working on that game with them.
And they expand on this just saying they're really happy to be working with Private Division, but they don't really give their opinions on that, which if anything makes me feel like they're not super giddy about it. And I would say it's pretty safe to conclude after watching this that Obsidian definitely wasn't the one going after Epic Game Store exclusivity, but it was rather Private Division, the publisher of this game. Although now going to some of the gameplay itself, this was pretty interesting. The gameplay takes place in the city of Byzantium. This is one of the towns we've heard about in the Outer Worlds in the past. This is the most wealthy or prosperous city here. Everyday people are not allowed to walk into this city, and in fact the vast majority of the people in here were just born in this city, and that's how they got in. Most people can't earn their way into it, but they also are quick to highlight a couple of things. Even the most prosperous city in this game still has some issues. From afar it looks really nice and pretty, but as you look closer you'll find some of the buildings decaying and things aren't in tip-top shape. Even beyond that, just like a lot of the other cities in the Outer Worlds, you're going to be able to find massive advertising all throughout this. So going through the gameplay, I'm not going to go over each individual thing they talk about, just some of the most interesting aspects. They went over a lot of things, and a lot of it is repeat from the past. I encourage you to just watch it over if you're that curious. We get a look at the main menu here, which looks actually really cool. It has pretty much all of the standard stuff you're used to, although one thing that stood out to me is deliverables. I don't know what it means in this context. Maybe it's future DLC, but it's like really high up on the menu for that. In-game, you see a lot of interesting things. As I mentioned before, advertisements everywhere. You can see ad drones flying around, as well as even when you actually talk to certain guards in the dialogue, they very explicitly name the weapons. Like, it's not just the grenade launcher, it's the brand of the grenade launcher and talking about how great that grenade launcher is all in one swoop. During this gameplay, we had 2 companions with us, Felix, who we've actually seen in the past already. They described him as liking mayhem, and he actually has this kicking ability that's really funny. Basically, as soon as you use his special ability, he'll just kind of swoop in and take people down. Then you also do have the other companion known as Nyoka. Apparently, she's a big game hunter on the planet Monarch. Monarch is going to be the planet where colonization failed, so she's kind of an outsider to this world. Her special ability is just blasting somebody with a Gatling gun after taking a hit of her drink. And I'm not sure if this is a byproduct of the difficulty, but in combat, these companions were really good, like a lot more relevant and useful than they ever have been in other games. In some instances, they're taking down several guards, and the companions are carrying their own, taking down a couple of guards each individually. This could have just been something for the dev build, but it was something that really did stand out to me. Even further, later on, as we actually are doing a quest, you could see the companions interjecting based off what you say. They give their own reactions, or also just if it's relevant, if they have their own opinion to share. It really felt like they were much more involved than they are in, like, let's say Fallout New Vegas. We also get a look at the actual menu system in this game. You can see some of the customization options for companions. You can change their weapons, change some of their armors or outfits. That little question mark thing is just a placeholder icon. It's not quite done yet. But then on this previous screen, you could see a lot of information about them. A lot of their relevant abilities, perks, skills, but also some of the other things like their behaviors. Naturally, with all those work in progress things, this will be populated with more digestible information once it's finally released. But it's pretty interesting to see just how much we're going to get on companions. This is a lot of info and a lot of details as to their abilities and how they can be helpful to you in different situations. We know in this game that your companion's skills are going to augment your own skills. Although outside of that, we actually get a quick peek at a lot of these other menus, and there's a lot of interesting things in here, and I actually would say a lot of it's done really well. It almost certainly seems like we weren't supposed to see this because they go through them quickly, but even further, if you actually pause on the menus, there's a lot of placeholder information. We get just a glimpse of the character screen, and it's pretty interesting. Some of the standard stuff, you can see the skills, perk menus, things like that, as well as a reputation menu, which I know a lot of people will be excited to have reputation in a game again. Although I find it interesting how the attributes for your body, mind, and personality actually have almost a status associated with it, or it appears to be a status. Based on what I'm seeing here, I would imagine that it could be not good, like bad, and then it wouldn't give you as many bonuses. Like maybe your character can get injured somehow, and then it will no longer give you plus 10% melee damage, but rather only plus 5%. That's pure speculation on my part, but I found that all to be very interesting. In the top left corner of the screen, we could also see some pretty cool stuff. Carry weight. Apparently this character had a ton of money on them, as well as their level. It's kind of weird, I think, how they show the number of weapons and armors you have in your inventory. I just think that's a peculiar stat to list there. But moving on to the inventory itself, you could actually see a lot of information here, and I actually really like this inventory layout. It looks like they segment things into each of their appropriate categories. So at the top, you can see weapons, armors, aid items, then maybe tools or junk. Towards the bottom of the screen, when you highlight an item, you actually have the option to send it to junk. You have the option to repair all of your presently equipped weapons. This game is going to feature a condition system for weapons that you could actually see when you highlight one, as well as some of the other relevant information to that weapon and what kind of stat it does benefit from. But even further, it looks like there's actually going to be different kinds of weapon damage. Of the weapons shown, it looks like 4 have exactly the same kind, and I think that's just going to be the typical damage type, either ballistic or just brute melee damage. But the 2 other weapons have different types, and I think this is going to be more almost elemental damage. Later on, we actually see that scythe, and that is going to be featuring corrosive damage as they describe it. They modified this weapon to deal corrosive damage, which will be better against heavy armors. But in past gameplay, we've seen the same weapon dealing a different type of damage. But we also do have that purple damage type, which also looks interesting. I'm not really sure what it corresponds to though. The quest screen is very work in progress, but it seems like we could actually see what's going to be one of the first quests in this game, helping Phineas out. But in order to do so, we first have to get our own ship. And I actually like this quest screen. I like the big image. I wonder if there's actually going to be a big custom image there for literally every different quest and side quest. The map is fairly standard with a couple of cool options. You have the choice to actually center on your player, or alternatively change the floor by which you're on. Although outside of that, it doesn't seem like there's anything too crazy or different about this one. And then finally, it appears like the journal is going to be more of a notes section, giving us some background on our companions or maybe how to use certain things in this game, although this was one of the most work in progress out of all of the menus we did see. One of the other things they show us during this gameplay is a quest. There's a director of commercials for one of the local companies. He saw us walking down the street and was like, hey, you'd be a great star for a commercial, and then we're going to film that commercial. The quest itself was relatively short, but it was actually really interesting. You go to the place and start filming the commercial, and you could really see how much choice you had here. Talking to some of the other hired actors, you could talk through the commercial, and they said, yeah, you'll continue to have dialogue choices, which will allow you to take things in different directions. But for this example, rather than doing that, they decided, hey, why don't we just shoot everyone? So they go that route, the combat route over the talking route. In the end, the director ends up being extremely pleased with how the commercial turned out, and he doesn't really care about the unnecessary casualties. I feel like actually seeing this put on display, it looked really cool. I really felt like you could go the nice guy route, the bad guy route, or even just the combat route. In reality, it seems like you're going to have a lot more options of that. During the later Q&A, they actually talk about this. They describe how in typical Fallout games, you did have 3 options. You could do talking, sneaking, or combat. While in the Outer Worlds, you're actually going to have 13 different options. All those 3 as well as some other ones. Maybe a combination of one of the above, or even a no-kill playthrough, or a kill-everything playthrough. And this is something they're really emphasizing. They're tasking some of their QA testers to play through the entire game using just that methodology. So there's some dude at Obsidian right now trying to beat the Outer Worlds without killing anyone. And then they are making tweaks or changes along the way to make sure that playthrough is viable, and they're doing this for each of the different 13 options. They never explicitly said it during the panel, but you could actually see during the gameplay, as they aim at various parts of these enemies, your damage there will have a different effect. I saw a variety of different things, such as weakening, crippling, maiming, blinding, staggering, and I'm sure there's a couple I might have even missed along the way. We've seen this to some extent in the past, but it's pretty interesting to see just how on display it was here. These only pop up as you're in tactical time dilation, which is like the bullet time added in by this. I'm not sure if maybe these are tied to perks or something along those lines, but it's pretty interesting to see how many different options you are going to have in combat. A lot of the combat here seemed pretty quick and easy, but I imagine fighting a tougher enemy, doing some of those things like crippling them or blinding them could be really valuable. Although overall, looking at some of the various combat clips, it looks really fluid. It definitely looks a lot more like the jump from Fallout 3 to Fallout 4. Certainly a vast improvement over what we saw in New Vegas. Speaking of which, we did see a variety of different weapons throughout this. I'm not going to go through and name each of them because that would extend this video by a lot. A lot of them looked really cool, as well as I mentioned before, we did see some of those corrosive effects on that one and the effects it actually has on people you take down with it. But one notable weapon they did showcase was a brand new science weapon. In the past, we have seen the shrink ray, but this time we saw the mandibular rearranger. So in effect, this was originally a bug in the game, and it's going to change the face of whoever you hit with it. They actually use this a lot, and it's pretty freaking funny. It also does have a freezing effect, so it slows down enemies. So far, this is just 2 of the science weapons. There's going to be 1 science weapon per every major category, but it did look pretty cool seeing it on display like this. And overall, I think I really liked what I saw. This game isn't visually going to be the best looking, and I think this is evidence of that. I'm not sure if they were actually playing on an Xbox One or an Xbox One X, although they definitely were using an Xbox controller and watching especially some of the combat gameplay, that was quite obvious. But as far as the level of choice, the dialogue choices, and even some of the combat we saw, this looks good. It looks solid. Everything I was hoping to see, I definitely did see, and even though there's no big surprises that really blew me out of the water, it still does look like a solid game, and I don't feel worse about it after watching this kind of live or more raw gameplay. A few of the other things they actually answered during the Q&A session, it actually seems like they're having a pretty big focus on accessibility with this game, which is really cool to see. They mentioned how all of the UI elements are first designed in grayscale, so the color of those elements is irrelevant. This hopefully making it so even colorblind people, who one of the game directors is colorblind, can play this game flawlessly. Even further, they talk about how they're doing testing on keyboards, controllers, and even some other odd combos. The game is meant to be played fully on each of those, and there shouldn't be any hiccups with either. This is going to be one of those games where you could venture out and go into areas you're not supposed to be. They actually make a comparison saying this game has its own version of the Good Springs to New Vegas run. So if that is something you wanted to do, the game won't stop you. It'll warn you, but you can still do it. Even further, also similar to Fallout, we know this game is going to have skill checks. We see several of these, but it won't always be speech-related skills. Sometimes you will see other things there alternatively. Even further, we also know this game is getting a flaw system. Basically, let's say you consistently die to a certain type of enemy, you could take a flaw which will make it so those enemies do more damage to you, but you can take an extra perk, which will be very valuable. Pretty much all the examples of these flaws we've seen thus far have been combat related, but they do mention that not every flaw will be combat related. Some of these are going to be like for addictions to certain items. And yeah, all around, just to reiterate, I really liked what I saw. And I also feel like based on the build that we presently saw, it was a very genuine look at this game. Like they were just playing the game. I don't feel like there's going to be significant downgrades. I feel like we got a real look at the Outer Worlds. And if you liked the look you just got, you'll probably like the final product because there's probably just going to be more polish and not a ton of other changes between now and the eventual release date. So yeah, hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. If you want to subscribe, there will be more Outer Worlds content on the way as we learn more. I am going to this year's E3, and hopefully there we learn more about this game, or maybe I'll even get to play the game. But until then, as always again, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.